In the middle of the marble foyer, my mother didn't even look at me as she spoke to a guest. "Oh, my eldest daughter? She does something for the government. The pay is hardly enough to afford a decent pair of shoes." She said this while pointing towards the servants' quarters. She had no idea that in that very servants' room I would begin to plan the demolition of the empire she built on lies. My name is Edith Myler. I am 43 years old, and the first blow landed before I even set my luggage down on the marble floor. I had driven for hours, the gray melancholy of the I-95 corridor giving way to the crisp, salt-laced air of Newport, Rhode Island. The gates to Seacrest, the sprawling Beaumont family estate, had swung open with a familiar, silent groan. It was the sound of a world I had escaped, a world I was now being dragged back into. My mother, Genevieve Beaumont, stood in the grand foyer, a vision of calculated perfection in an Oscar de la Renta cashmere sweater, and a string of pearls that probably cost more than my car. She didn't move toward me. There was no hug, not even the pretense of one. Her eyes, the color of a winter sea, swept over me from head to toe, taking in my simple black trousers and practical coat. It was a silent, swift execution of my worth. "You're here," she stated, her voice as smooth and cold as the polished stone beneath my feet. It wasn't a question or a welcome. It was an acknowledgement of an inconvenient fact. She didn't ask about my journey, didn't ask about my life. Her attention had already drifted to a guest who was admiring a porcelain vase. It was then, as she turned away, that she delivered the hook. "Oh, my eldest," she said to the woman, her voice carrying across the cavernous space. "She does something for the government. The pay is hardly enough to afford a decent pair of shoes." Then, without a backward glance, she gestured dismissively toward the West Wing. "Maria," she called out to the housekeeper, "take Miss Myler's luggage to her room in the West Wing." A cold fury coiled in my gut, but years of discipline, of holding my position under fire, kept my face a mask of neutrality. Maria, a kind-faced woman who had been with the family since I was a child, approached me. Her eyes, filled with a sympathy my own mother could never muster, met mine. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "I'm sorry, miss," her expression said. It was the only warmth I had received since arriving, and it came from a stranger in my own home. I realized with a sickening lurch that the staff saw me with more humanity than my own mother did. I was no longer a daughter, I was an assignment. Following Maria through the house was a tour of my own erasure. The grand foyer, once a testament to our shared history, was now a shrine to my half-brother, Julian. The grand oil portrait of my father, Arthur Myler, a respectable man of law, was gone. In its place hung an enormous, professionally shot photograph of Julian at the helm of his yacht, the Beaumont, winning the Newport Regatta. The display cabinet, which used to hold my military commendations alongside my father's legal awards, was now filled with Julian's gleaming silver sailing trophies. My Purple Heart, the medal I earned when shrapnel tore through my leg in Afghanistan, had been replaced by a trophy for a golf tournament. Genevieve glided past us as she was instructing a florist on the placement of a towering orchid arrangement. She paused, noticing my gaze fixed on the empty space where my father's portrait used to be. "We needed the space for actual accomplishments, Edith," she remarked coolly, picking an invisible piece of lint from her sleeve. "Things that sparkle, things of value." The words were not just a dismissal, they were a verdict on my life's work, on the sacrifices I had made in places she could never imagine. My service, my honor, in her world, They didn't sparkle, so they had no value. Maria led me down a long, narrow hallway I hadn't walked down in 20 years. The West Wing. Historically, the servants' quarters, home to the Irish maids and groundskeepers of a bygone era. The message was unmistakable. The room she opened was small and cold. The air was thick with the scent of dust and damp, a stark contrast to the perfumed air of the main house. A single narrow bed was pushed against a wall with faded peeling wallpaper, revealing patches of gray plaster beneath. The lone window offered a view not of the Atlantic Ocean, but of the grimy brick wall of the kitchen. This wasn't a guest room, this was a storage room for a forgotten relic. I placed my single bag on the floor. Maria hesitated at the door. "If you need anything, Miss Edith," she began, her voice soft. "I'm fine, Maria, thank you," I said, my voice steady. She nodded and quietly closed the door, leaving me in the suffocating silence. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, which sighed wearily under my weight. The cold of the room seeped into my bones, a physical manifestation of the absolute, soul-crushing loneliness I felt in the heart of the place I once called home. They hadn't just given me a small room, they had given me a label, unwanted, unimportant, inconvenient. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead against the cool, grimy glass. Through the gap between the kitchen wall and a row of overgrown hedges, I could just make out the distant silhouette of the hill where Island Cemetery lay, where my father was buried. They had erased him from the walls. Now they were erasing me. A new resolve, cold and hard as steel, began to form in the pit of my stomach. "Dad," I thought, the words a silent vow in the darkness of the room. "Your promise, I have to find it, and I will make them remember." The silence of the servants' room was a heavy blanket, thick with the ghosts of unspoken words and forgotten people. It was a silence I knew well. It smelled of mothballs and damp, a scent that transported me back to the sterile, quiet corridors of Newport Hospital, the night my father died. The memory, sharp and unwelcome, rose from the depths of my mind. He was in a sterile white room, swallowed by a bed too large for his shrinking frame. The steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only sound. I was 16, holding his hand, feeling the papery texture of his skin. His eyes, though clouded with pain, were fixed on me. "Everything I have, Edith," he had whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Material and otherwise, it's for you. You are my legacy. Don't let your mother—" His words trailed off into a ragged cough, his grip on my hand tightening. The promise was left hanging in the air, unfinished. Genevieve swept into the room then, a gust of expensive perfume and impatience. She didn't look at him, she looked at the machines. She pried my fingers from my father's. "He's rambling again," she said to the nurse, who followed her in, her voice sharp and dismissive. "Give him the sedative, he needs to rest." I stood there, frozen, a helpless teenager watching as my father's last words were silenced by a syringe. He was not just my father, he was Arthur Myler, a man of quiet integrity. But in that moment, to my mother, he was just a problem to be managed. That unfinished promise haunted me for years, a question mark branded onto my soul. After the funeral, all I ever saw was a simple will, leaving everything to Genevieve, his wife. It seemed his last words truly had been nothing more than ramblings. A few years later, Genevieve remarried. Her new husband was a titan of finance, and with him came a new name, Beaumont. She gave the name to her newborn son, Julian, like a coronation. But I remained Edith Myler. It wasn't an oversight, it was a statement. I was a relic of a previous life, a starter marriage, as one of her society friends had once whispered at a garden party. The name Myler became a brand, marking me as different, less than. I remember one Christmas, the house was ablaze with lights and the scent of pine and cinnamon. A magnificent tree stood in the grand foyer, dripping with crystal ornaments. Genevieve, her new husband, and a baby Julian were gathered around it, posing for the annual Christmas card photo. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, wearing a simple dress my father had bought me. I waited, my heart a tight knot in my chest, hoping to be called down. But no one looked up. The photographer's flash popped, capturing their perfect new family. And I, the ghost from a previous marriage, remained in the shadows, an invisible footnote in their story. The message was clear. My place was in the background. Back in the present, in the cold, dusty room, I pulled a small, worn wooden box from my luggage. It was the box given to us at my father's funeral. I lifted the lid. Inside, folded with military precision, was the American flag that had draped his coffin. He hadn't been a soldier, but he lived by a code of honor that would have made any general proud. He was the one who taught me that honor wasn't about public acclaim, but about the quiet, unwavering voice of your own moral compass. Edith, he used to say, don't ever let the noise of the world deafen you to the voice of the compass inside. My fingers, a soldier's fingers, trained to field strip a rifle in the dark, traced the familiar folds of the flag. It was a ritual I'd performed countless times over the years, a way to feel close to him. I ran my hand along the seam of the blue field of stars, a place where the fabric was slightly thicker, and then I felt it. A small, hard object, no bigger than my thumb, sewn deep within the lining. My breath caught. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. With trembling but deliberate movements, I found the loose thread and carefully pulled. The stitches gave way, revealing a small, tarnished brass key. It was an old-fashioned safe deposit box key. It felt heavy in my palm, heavy with the weight of years of silence. My father's last words echoed in my mind, no longer the ramblings of a dying man, but a desperate, final instruction. Don't let your mother. He had hidden this for me. He knew, even then, what she was capable of. The key wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a map, a loose thread in the tapestry of lies a Genevieve had woven for decades. A story where I was the flawed, unremarkable daughter, and she was the long-suffering matriarch. A flicker of hope, fierce and bright, ignited in the darkness of my despair. I closed my hand around the key, the cold metal biting into my skin. This changed everything. My first stop wouldn't be the bank. That could wait. I needed to go to him, to the one place in Newport where the truth hadn't been renovated or redecorated. I needed to stand at his grave. I needed to talk to my father. The next morning, I slipped out of Seacrest before the house stirred. I didn't take one of the family's polished Mercedes. I called a local cab. The key felt like a small, cold weight in my pocket, a secret I wasn't yet ready to unlock. First, I needed to visit the only person in this town who had never lied to me. Island Cemetery sits on a windswept hill overlooking the raw, churning expanse of the Atlantic. It's a quiet, solemn place, a world away from the manicured lawns and cocktail party chatter of Bellevue Avenue. I bought a single white rose from a small florist on the way, its petals still beaded with morning dew. My father's grave was simple, just as he had been. A flat granite marker, weathered by years of salt and wind, almost swallowed by the lush grass. The inscription read, Arthur Myler, husband, father, a good man. No grand titles, no list of accomplishments, just the truth. It was a stark contrast to the ostentatious mausoleums of Newport's other founding families, monuments built to defy mortality. My father had accepted it. I knelt and placed the white rose on the cool stone. The salty wind whipped strands of hair across my face. Here there was no judgment, no need for performance. I wasn't a disappointment or an inconvenience. I was just a daughter visiting her father. I traced the letters of his name with my finger, the familiar granite a small comfort. "I found it, Dad," I whispered to the wind. "I found the key." "Ma'am." The voice, low and respectful, cut through the roar of the ocean. I was on my feet in an instant, my body tensing, my training taking over. Every sense went on high alert. I turned to see Captain Marcus Thorne standing a few paces away. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, a stark contrast to the desert camouflage I was used to seeing him in. But his posture was the same, ramrod straight, shoulders back. A soldier. His eyes held none of the pity or condescending curiosity I'd seen in the faces of my mother's guests. They held only a deep, unwavering respect. "I didn't think I'd see you here," he said, his voice even. "It's the only place in Newport I still feel I belong," I replied, my tone clipped, guarded. He gave a slow, understanding nod. He didn't offer empty platitudes or condolences. He saw the situation for what it was. He took a step closer, lowering his voice against the wind. "You look out of your element back at the house, ma'am," he stated, not as a question, but as an observation. It was a directness I appreciated, a soldier's economy of words. "They don't know who you are, do they?" He didn't need an answer. He already knew. Marcus Thorne was the man whose life I had saved in the Syrian desert. He had been a young, fresh-faced lieutenant in my command during Operation Desert Fang. I remembered the ambush vividly, the roar of RPGs, the crackle of enemy fire, the chaos as our communications went down. I remembered seeing his vehicle hit, the plume of black smoke against the pale desert sky. I remembered giving the orders that got the rest of our team to a defensible position, then leading the counter-assault myself to pull him and his wounded gunner from the burning wreckage. He had seen me at my most primal, covered in sand and gunpowder, making life-or-death decisions in seconds. He had seen a courage and a leadership that Genevieve and Julian, in their world of regattas and stock portfolios, could never comprehend. He remembered it, too. I could see it in his eyes. He recalled the moment I knelt beside him, checking his wounds, my face a mask of calm focus, as bullets whizzed past our heads. He remembered me handing him my last canteen of water. To my family, I was a failure who couldn't afford good shoes. To this man, I was the officer who had walked through fire for him. Our conversation was brief, the unspoken understanding hanging heavy in the air between us. He was here visiting the grave of his own grandfather, a Navy man. We were two soldiers on hallowed ground, finding solace among the dead because the world of the living had become a battlefield of a different kind. As he prepared to leave, he paused. "Ma'am," he said again, his voice now low and serious. "Colonel Myler, I'm Julian's best man. I'm going to be right there in the center of their command structure." He looked me straight in the eye. "If you need fire support, and I mean anything, you just give the signal." He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a simple, stark white business card. It held only his name and a private cell number. "This line is always secure," he said, pressing it into my hand. His fingers were warm against my cold skin. The offer was a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. It was the first glimmer of light in the suffocating darkness of my return. I watched him walk away, his figure a strong, dark silhouette against the gray sky. I looked at the simple business card in my hand. Fire support, an ally inside the wire. For the first time since I'd arrived, a flicker of warmth, of something akin to hope, spread through my chest. Was I truly alone in this fight? Or was this the moment the battle plan began to change? The hope that had flickered to life at my father's grave was extinguished before it could even become a proper flame. That evening, the calculated cruelty escalated from passive erasure to active public execution. It began quietly, as the most devastating attacks often do. I was walking past my mother's study when I saw it lying on her antique mahogany desk, the seating chart for Julian's engagement party. It was a masterpiece of social engineering, calligraphed on heavy cream cardstock. My eyes scanned the names at the main table: Genevieve, her husband, Julian, and his fiancée, and a handful of Newport's most influential figures. My name, Edith Myler, was there originally. I could see the faint impression, but a thick, brutal line of red ink had been slashed through it. An arrow, drawn with the same vicious finality, pointed to a small, sad table in the far corner of the ballroom diagram, tucked away near the service entrance. The table for the B-list guests, the distant cousins and business associates, not quite important enough for the main stage. And beside my relocated name, a hastily scrawled note to the event planner: keep out of sight. The ink was a physical blow. It wasn't an oversight, it was a command. I was not just unwanted, I was a liability to be hidden. I felt the air leave my lungs, a cold dread creeping into the space where hope had been. This wound was deeper, more precise than any shrapnel. Dinner that night was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The dining room was suffocatingly opulent, the table set with Tiffany and Cabarrus silverware that reflected the cold light of the baccarat crystal chandelier. The guest of honor was a United States Senator, a man whose career my mother was carefully cultivating. The entire evening was a performance designed to showcase Julian, the golden son, and to solidify my status as the family footnote. As the servers brought out plates of lobster thermidor, the senator, a man with a politician's practiced charm, turned to me. "And Edith," he said kindly, "Genevieve tells me you've had quite an interesting career." Before I could form a reply, my mother laughed, a light, tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, our Edith is an adventurer, Senator," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Some mysterious government work. We don't really understand it, but I'm sure it's very earnest. It certainly hasn't left her with much of a flair for fashion, has it?" A wave of polite, knowing chuckles rippled around the table. I saw the flash of pity in the senator's eyes before he quickly looked away. I looked at Julian. He was intently focused on dissecting his lobster, his face flushed, refusing to meet my gaze. His silence was his consent. He was a coward, complicit in my humiliation. I sat there, a ghost at the feast, my blood turning to ice in my veins. But the final killing blow came with the dessert course. Julian, prompted by a sharp look from Genevieve, began to announce his groomsmen. He listed off a series of names from Wharton Business School and the Yacht Club. And of course, he concluded, my best man, Captain Marcus Thorne. Genevieve beamed, placing a perfectly manicured hand on my arm. Her touch felt like a spider. She leaned in, but spoke loudly enough for the entire table to hear, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "Marcus is such a wonderful choice, darling, and of course, your sister will be an honorary groomsman. As for Edith—" She paused for dramatic effect. Well, she doesn't really fit the lineup, you see. It's a matter of polish, of a certain refinement. You either have it or you don't. The final betrayal. It wasn't just that I was excluded. I was publicly declared unfit, unrefined, unworthy. The years of being overlooked, of being the other child, of swallowing my pride, all culminated in that single brutal moment. The dam inside me broke. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my napkin on the table. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The polite chatter died. Every eye was on me. I didn't say a word. I simply looked at my mother, holding her gaze for a long, silent second. I let her see the ice in my eyes, the death of the compliant daughter she thought she knew. Then I turned my back on them all and walked out of the room, the silence of the grand house roaring in my ears. I stood in the cold hallway, the distant sound of their laughter a faint, mocking echo. I looked at my own reflection in the dark glass of a display cabinet, a woman pushed to the very edge, and a question rose from the deepest part of my soul. A question not just for myself, but for anyone who has ever been made to feel small by the people who should have built them up. If it were you, if you had sacrificed everything, only to be tossed aside and publicly shamed by the very people you loved, what would you do? Would you swallow the pain and stay silent? Or would you make them pay for every single lie? I didn't have to wait for an answer. The cold resolve that had been forming inside me now hardened into steel. My hands, once trembling, were now perfectly steady. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers flying across the screen. I found the encrypted contact, the one person on this earth who understood the language of the war I was about to wage. I typed a short, simple message. Plan B is a go. Initiate Phase 2. The silence was over. It was time to speak in the only language they understood: power. The drive to Providence was a blur of highway lights and cold determination. I left Seacrest under the cover of a manufactured migraine, a convenient excuse that Genevieve accepted with a dismissive wave. She was too busy with floral arrangements to care about my health. The 40-minute drive was just enough time for the raw, hot anger to cool into a focused, tactical resolve. I was no longer a wounded daughter. I was a soldier on a mission. I met Anya Petrova at the Dorrance, a grand old bar in downtown Providence that used to be a bank. Its soaring cathedral-like ceilings and dark wood paneling swallowed sound, making it the perfect place for a conversation that should never be overheard. She was sitting in a secluded booth, a bottle of local Narragansett beer in front of her. She didn't look like me. Her black leather jacket, short, edgy haircut, and the small, intricate tattoo of a serpent behind her ear were a world away from my disciplined, understated style. But her eyes were the same, sharp, analytical, and fiercely loyal. They were the eyes of a survivor. We didn't hug, we didn't do small talk, we were soldiers. We communicated in nods and shared understanding. She took one look at my face. "You look like hell," she said, her voice a low growl. It was her version of, "I'm sorry for your pain." What did they do now? I didn't speak. I simply slid the crumpled seating chart across the table. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the crossed-out name, the arrow, the scribbled note. "Keep out of sight." She studied it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she carefully folded it, placed it on the table, and looked up at me. The warmth in her eyes had been replaced by chips of ice. "Okay," she said, her voice flat, deadly serious. "This isn't just about silencing you anymore, Edith. This is an erasure. They want you to not exist." She leaned forward, her intensity a palpable force. It's time we reminded them exactly who you are. Anya grabbed a cocktail napkin and a pen from her pocket. The strategist in her took over. All right, Colonel, here's the situation. Their primary weakness is their arrogance. They think you're a blunt instrument, a soldier with no subtlety. Good, we use that. She sketched a quick diagram of the Seacrest living room. They underestimate you. That's our kill zone. She reached into her jacket and placed a small, innocuous-looking object on the table. It was a simple black button, the kind you'd find on any blazer. This isn't a button, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It's a long-range audio transmitter, Israeli tech, 36-hour battery life. You're going to replace a button on one of the silk pillows on your mother's favorite sofa. The one right next to the telephone table. She tapped the pen on the napkin. We need her own words, Edith. In this kind of war, intelligence is everything. Their words are the ammunition we need. I stared at the button. A part of me, the daughter, recoiled. This felt like a fundamental betrayal. Anya, I hesitated, the name catching in my throat. She's my mother. Anya's hand shot across the table and covered mine. Her grip was firm, grounding. No, she said, her voice losing its tactical edge and filling with a fierce, protective loyalty. Listen to me. In this operation, she is the target. A target who has knowingly compromised a high-value national asset. And that asset, she squeezed my hand, is you, Major General. My head snapped up. She had used my real classified rank. I am not doing this because I feel sorry for you, Edith, she continued, her eyes boring into mine. I am doing this for the commanding officer who pulled me and my team out of a burning Humvee in Fallujah while we were taking heavy fire. The woman who refused to leave a man behind. I owe you my life, so you let me help you get your honor back. She leaned back, her point made. Now let's go build their gallows. We'll let them supply the rope. The doubt in my mind evaporated, replaced by the cold clarity I felt before a mission. She was right. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was about more than a stolen inheritance or a bruised ego. This was about my name, my service, my very identity. All the things I had fought and bled for. My family had declared war on me. They just didn't know I was about to fight back. I picked up the button. It felt cold and heavy in my palm, a tiny piece of technology that represented a monumental line to be crossed. But Anya was right. This was a tactical operation, and in war you use every weapon at your disposal. My next mission was clear. Plant the bug and wait for the enemy to reveal their position. That night, Seacrest slept under a blanket of feigned tranquility, but I was wide awake. The house was a labyrinth of silent, shadowed hallways. I moved through them like a ghost, my bare feet making no sound on the cold hardwood floors. I was an intruder in my own home, on a mission that felt both necessary and profane. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the stillness. This wasn't a battlefield I had trained for, but the objective was just as critical. The living room was bathed in the pale, milky light of the moon, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I moved toward the silk sofa, Genevieve's throne. My fingers, steady and precise, located the decorative button on the throw pillow nearest the phone. With a tiny pair of scissors from my travel kit, I snipped the threads. My hands, which had disarmed explosives under pressure, trembled slightly as I performed this small act of domestic treason. I replaced the original with Anya's device, its tiny lens almost invisible in the intricate fabric. I told myself this wasn't betrayal. This was intelligence gathering. This was recon. This was a mission to reclaim myself. Back in the suffocating confines of the servants' room, I sat on the lumpy bed and put in the single earbud Anya had given me. I connected it to my phone. The world went silent, save for the faint, static hiss. Then I heard it, the clink of ice in a glass, and my mother's voice, as clear and cold as crystal. She was on the phone with one of her society friends, her voice a lazy drawl. "Julian is worried about the optics? Oh, darling, please. Edith's presence is a temporary inconvenience, nothing more. A necessary prop for the family portrait. She'll never be anything more than a blunt instrument for the government. There's no finesse, no legacy. She simply doesn't have the Beaumont polish." The words didn't make me cry. The time for tears was long past. Each syllable landed like a small, sharp stone, building a wall of ice around my heart. I just listened. I recorded. Then I heard my brother's voice, weaker, more hesitant. "They must have put the call on speaker. I find it awkward when she's here, Mother," Julian whined. "My friends from the firm, they don't know what to say to her. She just stands there." She just stands there. My brother, for whom I'd missed my own promotion ceremony to attend his college graduation, saw me as an awkward piece of furniture. The ice around my heart thickened, but the true, devastating blow came later. The target had changed. The voice on the other end was no longer a friend. It was the family lawyer. Genevieve's tone was all business. "Just proceed with the sale of the last Myler parcel," she said, her voice clipped and devoid of emotion. "The coastal lot, the market is peaking and we need to liquidate. Edith never needs to know about Arthur's trust. The paperwork is ironclad. As the trustee, the decision is mine and mine alone." I ripped the earbud out, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The last Myler parcel, a raw, undeveloped piece of coastline my father had bought in the 70s. He had planned to build a small, simple cottage there, a place for just the two of us, away from the Newport spectacle. A place he called the Perch. He had left it for me, in a trust my mother had hidden from me for over 25 years. My hands were shaking, this time with a fury so profound, it felt like it would tear me apart. I scrambled for my phone and dialed Anya's secure number. "Talk to me," she answered immediately. "She's selling my father's land," I choked out, the words tasting like ash. She mentioned a trust, Arthur's trust. There was a moment of silence on the other end, then the frantic clicking of a keyboard. Anya was a virtuoso of the digital world. "A trust," she murmured. "Of course, it's the perfect crime. If she's the trustee and you're the beneficiary, she can legally manage the assets, but hiding its existence and liquidating it for her own family's benefit." Edith listened to me very carefully. Her voice was sharp, pulling me back from the edge. "They're not just erasing your identity. They are actively stealing your father's legacy from you. This is no longer a family matter. This is grand larceny. This is a felony." The word hung in the air. Felony. My father, a man of the law, a man who cherished the Bible, often quoted Luke 8:17 to me as a child. "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." The truth, he believed, always finds the light. Anya could uncover the crime, I knew that. She could trace the money. But I needed more than just evidence of theft. I needed to reclaim my honor from the mud they had dragged it through. I needed someone to legitimize the truth in a way they couldn't dismiss as the ramblings of a bitter, half-failed daughter. Someone with authority, someone from my world, not theirs. There was only one person. My resolve solidified. The mission parameters had changed. It was time to call in air support. It was time to call General Vance. The knowledge of my mother's felony was a cold, hard stone in my gut. Anya's expertise could trace the financial labyrinth of Genevieve's betrayal, but that was only half the battle. To fight a war on my mother's turf, a world of image, perception, and social standing, I needed a weapon they couldn't dismiss or discredit. I needed official, undeniable truth. There was only one person who could give me that. Using a secure satellite phone I kept for emergencies, I made the call. It felt like crossing a final Rubicon. The line connected, and a familiar, gravelly voice answered on the first ring, a voice that commanded respect from generals and presidents alike. "Myler," General Sterling Vance said. It wasn't a question. "General," I replied, my own voice steady, despite the turmoil inside me. There was a pause. I didn't need to explain. He already knew. "I've been waiting for this call," he said, his tone unwavering. "Naval War College, my office, tomorrow, Iro 800 hours, come alone." The line went dead. No pleasantries, no wasted words, just a direct order. A feeling of both immense dread and profound relief washed over me. I was no longer just a daughter in a family dispute. I was an officer being summoned by her commanding general. The game had changed. The next morning, I stood before the imposing granite facade of the Naval War College in Newport. This was my world. The air here wasn't filled with the scent of expensive perfume, but with the crisp, clean smell of the sea and the weight of history. This was a place of strategy, of intellect, of power, the very things my mother believed I lacked. General Vance stood waiting for me in his office, a spacious room lined with books on military history and geopolitical strategy. He was a living legend, a man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you, assessing every strength and weakness. He gestured to a chair, but didn't sit himself. He paced before the large window overlooking Narragansett Bay. "They think you failed, don't they?" he began, his voice calm yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. "They see your silence, the classified nature of your career, and they've mistaken it for weakness, for shame." He stopped pacing and turned to face me. On his large oak desk sat a thick manila folder. It wasn't just any folder. It was sealed with the bright red wax insignia of the Department of Defense, a document of the highest classification. "This," he said, tapping the folder with a single finger, "is the truth. Your file was never buried, Myler. It was protected. It was elevated." He looked me straight in the eye, and the world seemed to slow down. After Operation Desert Fang, a promotion was approved at the highest levels. It was kept classified due to the ongoing nature of your subsequent assignments. He let the silence hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final payload. "You are no longer a colonel, Edith. You haven't been for 3 years. You are Major General Myler." The air rushed out of my lungs. Major General, 2 stars, a rank I had never dreamed of, a promotion I had never been informed of. The room tilted slightly. For years I had accepted the quiet, unceremonious end to my active career as a necessary consequence of my specialized work. I had accepted the narrative Genevieve had written for me, the daughter who had peaked, who now did some vague, unimportant government job. In a single sentence, General Vance had detonated that entire reality. "Captain Thorne contacted my office a year ago," Vance continued, his voice pulling me back to the present. "A routine background verification when Julian asked him to be his best man. Thorne saw your real file. He knows who you are, General. He's a good soldier. He's been waiting for your signal. The revelation about Marcus sent another shockwave through me. He hadn't just been respectful, he had been protecting his commanding officer. The general pushed the sealed file across the polished desk. It slid to a stop directly in front of me. "This is your ammunition," he said. "It's all in there. The official promotion orders. Signed by the Secretary of Defense. Citations for your Distinguished Service Cross and your Silver Star. The after-action report from Desert Fang, unredacted. And a personal letter of commendation from the President." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that demanded my full attention. "You're not just attending a wedding, Edith. You are a 2-star general of the United States Army. You are returning to a battlefield your family created. You are going back to end a war." I placed my hand on the sealed file. It felt warm, alive with the weight of the truth it contained. The years of being dismissed, of being the lesser child, of being the family failure, it all began to fall away, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I was not who they said I was. I was Major General Edith Myler. And the general was right. This was a war. I looked up at him, my voice clear and steady for the first time in days. "Thank you, sir," I said. "This time I'll be writing the rules of engagement." Armed with the truth from General Vance, I felt a new sense of gravity, of cold, hard purpose. I was no longer just fighting for myself. I was fighting for the rank I now held, for the honor of the uniform. But I had underestimated the depths of their cruelty. I thought the war would be fought at the wedding. I was wrong. They launched their preemptive strike at the engagement party. The event was held at the Newport Yachting Center, a glittering affair overlooking a harbor full of multi-million-dollar boats. I chose to wear a simple, elegant navy blue dress. I wasn't hiding anymore. I walked with my head held high, the sealed file from General Vance feeling like a piece of armor tucked away safely in my hotel room. But I never made it past the velvet rope. A burly security guard stopped me at the entrance, a clipboard in his hand. "Name, please." "Edith Myler." He scanned the list, his finger tracing down the page. He shook his head. "Sorry, ma'am, you're not on the list." It was so blatant, so childish, I almost laughed. Right on cue, Genevieve and Julian appeared, gliding toward the entrance like royalty. My mother, draped in diamonds, gave the guard a dazzling smile. "Oh, there must be some confusion," she said, her voice loud enough for the cluster of arriving guests to hear every word. "She's with us. I think her invitation was for the staff party, perhaps?" The insult hung in the air, thick and poisonous. A few guests tittered behind their hands. Julian, my own brother, stepped forward, his face a mask of pained embarrassment. "Edith, you're making a scene," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. "This is my night. Just go." His words were the final, cowardly betrayal. I looked from his weak, pleading face to my mother's triumphant smirk. She thought she had won. She thought this public humiliation was the checkmate. I held my ground, my silence a defiance she couldn't comprehend. I was about to turn and walk away to save my fight for the main event, but she wasn't finished. She had one more round in the chamber. At that exact moment, a collective buzz went through the crowd. Phones began to vibrate, screens lighting up the dim evening light. A notification had just gone out from the Gilded Tattler, the most venomous gossip column on the East Coast. Marcus Thorne, already inside, sent me a screenshot. The headline was a masterpiece of character assassination. Disgraced officer from prominent Newport family. Surfaces at brother's engagement. The article was a work of fiction, citing anonymous family sources. It painted a picture of a failed officer hinting at a dishonorable discharge after a botched mission, a woman now desperately clinging to her family's prestige. They had taken my classified silence, the silence I kept to protect my country and my missions, and twisted it into a confession of shame. They had weaponized my honor against me. I looked up and met my mother's gaze across the small crowd. She was smiling, a cold, victorious smile. She had orchestrated this. This was her kill shot, but she had miscalculated. She wasn't dealing with her forgotten daughter anymore. She was dealing with a general she had pushed too far. In warfare, there's a principle I've always lived by. The best time to counterattack is in the chaotic moment after your enemy has fired their biggest weapon, right when they think they've won. A cold calm settled over me. The discipline I had cultivated over 20 years on the battlefield took over. All the pain, all the humiliation, all the anger, it coalesced into a single point of absolute clarity. I turned my back on them, on the whispers and the stares, and walked away from the lights of the party, disappearing into the cool darkness of the parking lot. I pulled out my secure phone and dialed Anya. "They launched a media attack," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "An article. They called me a disgrace." Anya was silent for a beat. Then she said, "Good, they've shown their hand. They've fired their last shot." "They think silence is weakness," I said, the words coming out hard as diamonds. "But they're wrong. It's discipline. And tonight, my discipline is over." I ended the call and walked back to my hotel room. I didn't rush. Every movement was deliberate. I sat at the small desk, opened my encrypted laptop, and accessed a firewalled server. There it was, the entire unclassified after-action report for Operation Desert Fang. Photos, timelines, commendations, the truth. Then I made my final call to the number on the business card Marcus had given me. He answered on the first ring. I didn't say hello. I just spoke the two-word code phrase we had used in Syria when we were about to initiate a full-scale assault. Sandstorm. There was no hesitation on his end. His voice came back, crisp and clear, the voice of a soldier receiving his orders. "Roger that, General," he said. "Sandstorm is a go." The war had begun. Julian's wedding day dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect late spring day that Newport prided itself on. The ceremony was at an old stone church overlooking the Atlantic, a quaint, historic affair. I sat in a back pew, a silent observer in a simple dress. I was saving my uniform for the main event, the reception. It was held in the grand ballroom of the Breakers, the most opulent of all the Newport mansions. It was a palace built on industrial fortunes, a monument to the Gilded Age, its ceilings dripping with gold leaf and crystal chandeliers. Tonight it would be the stage for the fall of the House of Beaumont. I arrived late, deliberately. The party was in full swing, a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. And then I made my entrance. I didn't walk in as Edith Myler, the forgotten daughter. I walked in as Major General Edith Myler of the United States Army Special Forces. My formal dress uniform was a deep, authoritative blue, perfectly pressed. On my chest, my medals were not mere decorations. They were a silent, damning testimony. The Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, the Purple Heart. They gleamed under the soft light of the chandeliers, catching every eye. A shockwave of silence rolled through the ballroom. The string quartet faltered, a violin screeching into the sudden quiet. All conversation ceased. Hundreds of faces turned towards me, a mixture of confusion, shock, and awe. I saw Genevieve and Julian near the head table. My mother's face went white as marble, her champagne flute frozen halfway to her lips. Julian stared, his jaw slack, as if he were seeing a ghost. I walked calmly, my regulation, low-quarter shoes, clicking with a steady, resolute rhythm on the marble floor. A sound more powerful than any shouting. I ignored the gasps and whispers, my gaze fixed forward. I was a general taking the field. The decisive moment arrived during the best man's speech. Marcus Thorne, handsome and composed in his tuxedo, took the microphone. He delivered a few canned, charming remarks about Julian. And then he broke script. He turned away from the bride and groom and faced the ballroom. His eyes found me, sitting at the forgotten table in the back. He straightened his shoulders, and in a room full of Newport's elite, he executed a perfect, crisp military salute. "Major General Myler, ma'am," he said, his voice ringing with a profound, unwavering respect that echoed through the silent hall. The room held its breath. Before Genevieve could react, before she could scream, Marcus continued, his voice clear and strong. "This woman is not just the groom's sister," he declared, his words a cannon blast, in the fragile, polite atmosphere. "This woman saved my life and the lives of my entire team in the Syrian desert when we were all supposed to die." A single sentence, and the foundation of their world cracked. Immediately, as if on cue, the massive projector screen behind the band, which had been displaying a slideshow of Julian and his fiancée, flickered to life. Anya's work. The sandstorm. The first image was a satellite photo of a desert firefight. Then a picture of me, my face covered in grime and sweat, pointing to a map spread on the hood of a Humvee. Official declassified documents from the Pentagon flashed on the screen, detailing Operation Desert Fang. Then came the video. General Sterling Vance, in his full dress uniform, his face stern and authoritative, looked directly into the camera. "It is my distinct honor," his voice boomed from the speakers, "to confirm the exemplary service and heroism of Major General Edith Myler, one of this nation's finest strategic minds and bravest warriors." Chaos erupted. Genevieve shrieked, a raw, ugly sound that tore through her perfect socialite facade. "It's fake! It's all fake! Security!" Julian, horrified, stumbled towards her, grabbing her arm. "Mother, what is this? You told me she was a logistics officer. You told me she failed." His bride stared at him, her fairy tale smile melting into a mask of confusion and horror. Their empire of lies was crumbling in real time, under the spotlights of their own extravagant party. Amid the pandemonium, I walked to the stage. I took the microphone from Marcus's hand. The room fell silent again, all eyes on me. I looked out at the sea of shocked faces, then let my gaze fall on my mother and brother, who were now huddled together, exposed and defeated. My voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the magnificent gilded room. "Protecting the family name," I said, each word precise and clear, "should not mean burying the truth." A single person began to clap, then another and another. It started as a hesitant patter, then swelled into a roar, a thunderous, sustained ovation that shook the crystal chandeliers. It was a validation I had never sought, but it was a verdict on the lies that had defined my life. The Beaumont dynasty, built on perception and deceit, had fallen. The applause was a deafening roar, a wave of recognition I had never known. But as I stood there, looking at the wreckage of my family, my mother's face a rictus of hate, my brother's a mask of pathetic despair, I didn't feel the sharp thrill of victory I had expected. I felt a vast, hollow emptiness. The war was over. The truth had won. But what comes after? The aftermath of the wedding was not a celebration, but a controlled demolition. My story, amplified by the national news media, became a sensation. The tale of the forgotten general and the high society family built on lies was irresistible. The Beaumont Empire, an edifice of perception and influence, turned to dust. Genevieve became a social pariah overnight, stripped of her board positions on every major charity for deliberate misrepresentation and deceit. Her name, once a symbol of Newport prestige, was now a synonym for disgrace. A week later, Julian found me. He had canceled his honeymoon. He came not to the grand estate, but to the small temporary office I had rented in downtown Newport. He looked smaller, diminished, the golden boy glow completely extinguished. He didn't offer excuses or pleas for forgiveness. He just placed a thick legal binder on my desk. "This is everything," he said, his voice broken. "All the documentation for Dad's trust, the accounts, the properties Genevieve sold. Everything. I was wrong, Edith. I was a coward." I looked at my half-brother, a man I had once tried to love and felt nothing. Not anger, not pity. Just a profound, quiet emptiness. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind only the cold ash of what could have been. I didn't offer him forgiveness. It wasn't mine to give. Forgiveness was something I needed for myself, a release from the weight of his family's toxicity. "Use it to do the right thing, Julian," I said, my voice even. "For the first time in your life." He nodded, turned, and walked out, leaving the binder, the proof of his family's crimes and his own cowardice behind. Months passed. With my inheritance finally restored, I founded a strategic consulting firm. It was successful, challenging work. But the true measure of my victory didn't come from a business deal or a newspaper headline. It came in the form of a quiet email on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a quarterly report from a small anonymous fund I had established years ago to support veterans transitioning to civilian life. I usually just glanced at them, but this time one story caught my eye. The report detailed the case of a young female Marine captain who had returned from a brutal tour in Iraq, only to face dismissal and contempt from her own family, who couldn't understand her scars, both visible and invisible. My fund had provided her with a grant to start her own small business, a security firm that employed other female vets. The report included a quote from her. "For the first time, I feel like someone saw my service, not just my struggle. This grant wasn't just money, it was a statement that I mattered." I sat back in my chair, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. This was my legacy. Not the medals gleaming in a display case, not the 2 stars on my shoulder. It was this single changed life. This was the interest paid on my father's stolen inheritance. This was the true meaning of the Myler name. The story ends not in a grand ballroom, but in the quiet of my new office. The sun is rising over Newport Harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It's a quiet dawn of my own making. I am preparing for a speech I've been invited to give. The keynote address at the graduation ceremony at West Point. It's an honor that leaves me humbled. On my desk, next to the file containing my speech, sits a simple bouquet of white daisies. They arrived this morning without fanfare. The card, written in Julian's unsteady hand, contained only a few words. For the sister I was always proud of, even when I was too much of a coward to admit it. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. He had used the recovered funds to establish the Arthur Myler Grant, a permanent fund to support the children of fallen soldiers. He was finally doing the right thing. I turn to my laptop, the blank page waiting. I am finally ready to tell my own story in my own words. The book tour, the interviews, all of that will come later. For now, there is only this quiet moment, this sacred act of reclaiming my own narrative. I type the title of the first chapter. It's a title that's been waiting to be written for 25 years. The general they forgot. My past was no longer a weapon used against me. It was a foundation. I had not only reclaimed it, I was building my future upon it. A future defined by truth, forged in honor, and finally, settled in peace. And so, that is my story. Not a story of revenge, but of reclamation. I shared it with you because I know I am not alone. I know many of you have faced your own battles, fought in silent wars against those who should have been your allies. Your battlefield might not have been a ballroom in Newport, but your courage is just as real. If my story resonated with you, if it gave you a sliver of hope or a spark of strength, please share it. There is someone out there who needs to hear that they are not invisible. And for more true stories of resilience and the fight for honor, make sure you follow our channel. Thank you for listening. This is Major General Edith Myler, signing off.